the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Burger. And in today's episode, we have a special milestone, our 100th episode. And I think to kick things off, it would be good for both of us just to, talk and reflect a little bit on really what this means to us, I guess at a personal level and also, for the two of us. And I think this has been, something we've been working on over these past 2+ years, have had, 100 episodes. Have had a number of different guests from both the U.S., where we're both based, and other countries as well, including Europe and Canada, and a number of very interesting guests from we've had former professional players, current professional players. We've had some coaches. We've had people on the academic side in terms of researchers and professors, and many episodes where the two of us have talked about a number of different topics relating to the mental side of tennis. And yeah, I think as we start to think about this, it's interesting to really think back to how this all started. And I think we've shared it a little bit just in terms of how the two of us met, but it was a little bit random in terms of us meeting through a webinar early on in COVID. I think maybe May of 2020 or something like that, May or June. And it was through, it was a sports psychology webinar, and I think there was only about 20 of us in the discussion. And Brian and I think had both heard of each other, had never met, but had we quickly realized that we both coached at the time in the same conference. I was at Sacred Heart, Brian being at Bryant University. And from that point, I remember we set up a phone call, and the idea sort of came about in that way. So a little bit randomly, and actually started, before we had ever actually met in person. So no, I think as I and we start to reflect on this and sort of reaching this point, it's just interesting, thinking back to its origins and how, it did start sort of randomly in that way and has really blossomed over these 2+ years into something that I've have really enjoyed. Has definitely been something that has been really a highlight of this time for me. And yeah, has definitely been also an opportunity, where I feel like I've grown and learned a lot through these conversations, through the interviews, through you, Brian, as well. Just learning from your experiences and input. And it's been amazing. So just wanted to start there.
Yeah, I agree. It's like you said, it's a little random, a little serendipitous, and I think because of COVID, we both kind of weren't busy at all. Um, Here in the northeast part of the United States, all of the indoor tennis clubs were closed, and at least in Massachusetts, all of the public outdoor courts were locked, and so nobody could play, nobody could train, and therefore I wasn't busy. I don't think you were either, and so we were looking for some projects, and this was one. And I had dabbled in doing a podcast on my own previously, but I hadn't been very consistent about it. And I always loved the idea of broadcasting. And so this is like a perfect platform for that. And it's been a really great 2 years. I think getting to know you, Josh, and I think developing friendship, and which has been awesome. And I agree with you that I think I've learned a lot from you, and I've learned a lot from our conversations and our guests. So it's been a lot of fun, and I hope that others have also gained some value from the podcast over these last couple of years. And this is a great milestone to celebrate. We talk about when we work with athletes, the idea of setting goals and doing things, but a lot of times these goals are simply milestones on some journey. We don't really know where that journey is going here, but I think as long as we feel like we're having fun and providing value, and there are interesting things to talk about, we'll continue to do this, and we'll look for the next 100 to do. So I'm looking forward to the future of this, but it's really been a great learning experience these last couple of years, and just appreciate all the relationships that we've been able to develop through the podcast. I think we've gotten to meet some people that we would not have normally met or would not have normally even reached out to. I think like Howard Bryant. the journalist from ESPN, the award-winning author, um, some of the academic people that we've reached out to. So in that regard, it's been great to kind of build those relationships. And so I think what we wanted to do today was also recognize some of the feedback and questions that we've gotten from the listeners. And because it's nice when you can interact. And I think we've both had some stories, Josh, where we've just perhaps gone to play tennis or gone someplace and someone will see us or see you and they'll say, "Hey, I listen to the Tennis IQ podcast," and you have this kind of really cool connection with somebody. And I'm always shocked, like, I don't even know if anybody listens to this, but people do. And which is really cool to then talk about particular episodes or themes and you go a little bit deeper. And I think that's why we kind of wanted to do sort of like a mailbag episode today and get some questions. We've got some things to talk about. And then we've got a little bit of feedback, again, just to sort of celebrate episode 100. And, then we'll get right back to work on, 101. Because we're recording this during the U.S. Open. We'll certainly have a U.S. Open recap. And we look forward to that. So, Josh, would it make sense, do you think, to start off with one of the questions that we received?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, so this is from Charlie Ferber, lives in London in the UK, and he says, "Hi guys, congratulations for reaching 100 episodes. I've been a loyal listener and have enjoyed and learned a lot from your wisdom. My question is, in over 40 years of playing tennis at club level, I've heard the comment, the mental side of tennis is the most important part of the game. And yet, with very few exceptions, I don't think that any of the players I know that have ever read, watched, or took a lesson on the mental game. They even laugh at the idea, and yet in social settings, they all talk a good game about this subject. Why is that?" So I'm going to throw that to you first, right? Because it's an interesting question, and I think it's on the mark.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Charlie, for reaching out and the positive words and for the question. I think he mentioned that having played tennis at the club level for over 40 years, right? So I think part of it is it shows the shifts that this field of sports psychology has really undertaken over these past few decades. Where I think you know maybe, and again, I wasn't around at the time, but um in the 80s, in the 70s or 80s, maybe even 90s, I think it would have been maybe not unheard of, but certainly very unlikely, uncommon for club level players to be, utilizing sports psychology services, whether it means, meeting with somebody like myself or with Brian, or maybe reading books in the area, or even really engaging in elaborate discussions on the mental side of the game, because I think there at the time there was still a lot more stigma surrounding psychology and sports psychology, and almost with the idea that we don't want, as athletes we can't show off any sort of weakness. It's all about being tough. It's all about sort of not showing any sort of flaws or holes in our game or vulnerability. And I think that's changed a lot in these past few decades. I think a big reason for that is top athletes who have really spoken out. And we've talked about some examples in tennis, whether they be Marty Fish, whether they be Naomi Osaka, Bianca Andreescu, Nick Kyrgios. There've been many top tennis players who've spoken out about mental health, and also athletes in other sports. I mean, in basketball, Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, certainly Michael Phelps, and Simone Biles. I don't think there's any more high profile athletes or more accomplished athletes at the Olympic level, at the international level than those two, and they've both spoken very openly about their struggles with mental health. So I think obviously we on this podcast and professionally, the two of us really talk and focus on the mental performance side, rather than the mental health side, though they can be connected and linked, certainly. But I think the fact that so many athletes have spoken out about mental health, and also top athletes have talked about mental performance more, whether it's their use of sports psychology professionals and being open about that, rather than that being something that's maybe more hidden or more behind the scenes, but more and more, people giving credit to their sports psychology professionals and talking openly about it. And I think also more, as we're watching professional tennis, um, it just being clear how important the mental side of the game is, and I think it always has been, but I think maybe in recent years, it's just talked about certainly a lot more. Whether it be by the commentators, whether it be by the players in their interviews. So I think a long answer to the question, but I think over the decades the stigma has changed a lot. It has lessened certainly, and I think that's a big reason why. And I think nowadays it's a lot more common for club players, for adult USTA players, for instance, or maybe LTA players, right, in the UK, to be utilizing sports psychology services, such as working with a professional or reading a book or maybe taking a course or something on this area because they recognize the importance. So great question, Charlie. And yeah, what do you think, Brian?
I agree about the shift piece. And I think it has changed. I think even just in the last 10 years, it's changed. And I think it's similar to what was happening on the physical side, say in the 70s and 80s, where, like, if you play at an academy or a college team now, strength and conditioning it's integrated into everything that you do. That really wasn't the case in the 70s and 80s. And really it was like the late, I want to say, at least where I was growing up, the late 70s, when you started to see more of these nice gym facilities becoming, a little bit more mainstream. And so it wasn't as present even throughout the 80s, and then it became more and more. And now it's just normal, right? So we had that shift of, hey, this is a necessary piece for tennis too. It's not just about going out onto the court and hitting balls and then you go home. Now there's a lot more that goes into it, and having been at the US Open this past week, you can just see, especially the younger players, how fast and strong these players are. And that was very different than, say, 20, 30 years ago. Not that they weren't fast and strong, but this is like another level. Even think like of Carlos Alcaraz. I mean, it's just different the way these guys move. So I think that is one thing, and that's I kind of equate it to what happened there. It's perhaps a slower shift, but I do think that mental skills training and mental performance will continue to get closer and closer to a mainstream thing. You mentioned on the performance side. So somebody who has talked a lot about it is Iga Swiatek and her sports psychologist, Daria Abramovich. So, and when we talk mental health, one of the reasons it's important is that we want to be focusing on activities that help keep you on the sort of the health side versus the illness side. And if you are healthy, you're going to perform better. So if you are recognizing that every one of us is a person first, and tennis is something we do. Tennis is like a project we have. And therefore, if we're working on the whole person and understanding, what it means to live a meaningful, fulfilling life, flourishing in various areas, it's going to make it easier to perform on the court. So I think that's one thing that I just wanted to say with respect to mental health, and that's kind of the perspective that I take on it with players that I work with. I do agree that the stigma is also going down, and I'm seeing even players in their 40s and 50s wanting to do this. Again, maybe that's still the minority, but when I even do group presentations, Josh, it's like there's a real hunger and enthusiasm for this content. And I think part of it is also people just don't know what it even means to do mental training. So I'll often get a question, all right, yeah, you do that. So how do you do that? Like, what do you work on? Because I think maybe they think it's just a lot of talking, whatever. And so I'll talk about a few things and, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think once people have a better idea of what it means to do training on your mental game, then it maybe becomes easier to adopt or be open to that. Yeah, maybe there's some sort of threat thing going on as well. Certainly when I was growing up, this is another shift, Josh, is that mental toughness by many coaches was thought of as something that you either had or you didn't. It was more this sort of born with it type of thing. I think we've been able to dispel that over the years. There might be still a minority of people out there who think it's just an ingrained trait, but that was certainly the case when I was younger. And because people just weren't equipped to coach it, to teach it, and I think that may have just been an easy way. Well, it's just not mentally tough, or that one is really tough. So I think that's a bit of it as well. And so I hope that maybe 10 years from now, we've evolved even more. To not only are we getting people to talk about their mental health stories or even mental illness stories, but also to talk about their mental performance stories. And because we do see in various sports people who are employed really at the mental performance level. I think Major League Baseball in the U.S. is one area where almost every team has a number of mental performance consultants. And then I'm sure it's, exists at the other sports as well, but that just seems to be the one where they employ a lot. And that's because they have big organizations. They not only have the first team that plays in the majors, but they have a whole minor league system that a lot of those performance consultants take care of. So how about we go to a question that you have, Josh?
Yeah, sounds good. So one question I have, and this is actually from someone I've interacted with a lot, I guess, over this last year or so, and actually we met up I guess a couple months ago in Connecticut when I was there at the time. So this is from John Kelly from Milford, Connecticut, and here's what he said. Huge fan of the show since episode 1. I love the podcast so much. It's been as important to me as Winning Ugly, as Winning Ugly has been to me all these years, from all the guests you have on to the pre and post match tips. It's been a game changer for thousands of listeners around the world. My question to you, Josh and Brian, is at nearly 45 years old, at my age and current playing abilities, I can't stop wondering what my ceiling is. I play 3.5 tournaments, but have one at 4.0 level as well. So I guess my question to you guys is, are any of us ever happy with our game? Thanks, guys. John. So first of all, very, very nice, very complimentary. So thank you for that. And a great question in terms of being satisfied, in terms of being able to, sort of push the boundaries of our own games at whatever age we are. So Brian, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, are we ever happy with our own game? I think, first of all, you have to figure out why you play. And can use a couple of frameworks here, really from theories of motivation. So we've talked about here, self-determination theory by Ryan and Dacey. And there are three main components to intrinsic motivation that they talk about are competence / mastery, autonomy, and relatedness. And sometimes, we're not necessarily at the same level in all three. So, for example, there might be one of those three that is more dominant for a player. So, for example, sometimes I play with a friend who loves playing tennis. He plays all the time, but his dominant motive of those three is actually the relatedness piece. So for him, he's a good player, but he plays more because it's a great social activity. It's a way for him to connect with his buddies. Yeah, he wants to get better, but what's more important is playing with his friends. And so for that person, maybe he is happy with his game because it's satisfying that particular need. That's his dominant need. Now, if your dominant need is, the mastery competence piece, then maybe you're not happy with your game ever. Maybe because you're always looking to improve something. And I think that's where a lot of us fall, is that we're always trying to get a little bit better, a little bit better. And I would suggest a good way to just examine, maybe John could do this, is something called a performance profiling exercise, where you start off thinking about just tennis performance in general and what you think is important to it. And it doesn't have to just be on the mental side, although that should be one component. I would say physical, maybe your tennis skills, your strength and conditioning, your mental and emotional skills. Think of those as your high-level categories. and then just start listing off the different skills or areas of focus that you think are important to really good tennis performance. And once you have that list, then you can go about and look at, okay, how good am I at each one of these? Maybe give yourself a 1 to 10 score. And then when you have that, all right, now that I've got, let's say you came up with 15 things. All right, what are my top 8? What do I think are the 8 most important of the ones that I came up with? Now you've given yourself something, just based on your own analysis of your game and what you think is really important, of some things that you could potentially work on. So let's say you said, focusing on one point at a time is really important to tennis performance, but you rated yourself a 5. Okay, great. Where would you like to be, say, in the next 6 months? Could you move the 5 to a 7? So by doing this very simple exercise, you open yourself up to like all these kinds of improvement opportunities, and you can see maybe in the next 6 months, what do I want to work on? Well, now that you've got something like focus on, the next point, well, that probably opens up your eyes to, all right, how do I improve that? Maybe I think about a routine. Maybe I work with Josh. Maybe I watch the 16-second cure on YouTube. There are a whole bunch of things that could help you do that. And then by making those improvements, you'll certainly see an impact in your game. So I think that's a really easy exercise for those of us who are not happy with their games, if you haven't done that. And then after 6 months, you could do it again. Maybe there are new things that hit the list. Because you may not try all 8. You may just work on a couple of your top 8 and just use that like as a development plan. So that's kind of how I would say it, Josh. I do think a lot of us who are more playing tennis for the mastery piece and wanting to get better, we probably, John's at 45. I'm older than he is, so I can tell him that there's still room to grow. There are things that, you can still be getting stronger and faster at 45. You can certainly become wiser and more mature on the court. You can learn to handle adversity and these things better. And so I think there's a ton of room for growth for John.
Awesome. No, I'm glad that you brought up the performance profiling piece, because that is, I think, definitely a very helpful exercise, both at the individual level and also at the team level.
Yeah.
Where you could take a team and go through, all right, I think it can make it easier to develop goals, because you can start to lay out what is going to be most important for our success this season or our success going forward, and laying that out and starting to come up with a process of judging yourself or grading yourself in these areas. And it becomes pretty clear, all right, maybe these are the areas to focus on, because it can be, I think, regardless of age, it can be, it can feel at times, and I've felt this, that maybe you hit a wall, or maybe you're in a slump, or you're not sure how to get to that next level. So I think that's definitely an exercise that can be used to start to make things more clear in terms of what to focus on. And then, going through a process where, you come up with a plan for how to handle that, right? Whether that means taking lessons, whether that means more match play, whether that means working with a sports psychology professional, whether that means maybe focusing more on the strength and conditioning piece or on the nutrition piece, right? But starting to identify, all right, what are those areas maybe where I really excel and I feel like I, do better than many of my peers, and what are the areas maybe where I'm falling short? And no part of that is to say, let's only focus on weaknesses or perceived weaknesses. And we recently talked about a strength-based approach and how you can, continue to work on your strengths, and how really the top players in the world are the top players in the world because of their strengths in a large part. So to continue working on those strengths and to be very clear about what those are, but also to identify areas of improvement, especially maybe if you're feeling stuck, and then coming up with a plan for attacking each of those areas. But yeah, great question from John, and I know he's been a loyal and long-time listener, so thank you.
That's great. All right. We've got another Connecticut resident weighing in here. So Steve Gulla. Steve, actually, I've known since high school, back in Rhode Island. He's a great player. And so he's got a couple of questions. So we'll take one at a time. But he says, "Love the podcast you guys are doing. I listen when I'm running or at the gym." Question number one: playing it too safe. How to make yourself miss more in a match so you don't worry about mistakes. What should be the mental approach in this case? What do you think?
Yeah. So it's interesting the way he asked it, the way that he asked how to make yourself miss more, because, you know, I think a lot of players fall into this trap of being afraid to miss, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to miss. And I have always been more on the sort of counterpuncher consistent side where, I think I've never had maybe some of the weapons that some of the other players have had. So I have sometimes fallen into this trap of being afraid to miss and afraid to really go for my shots. So I think I would really focus on the start of the match. Start both in terms of the warm up and those first couple games, giving yourself permission to hit out, giving yourself permission to maybe hit long, right? I think there can be a big difference between missing into the net and maybe missing long or wide. So giving yourself the permission to hit with depth and to hit closer to the lines. And maybe that means you miss wide or you miss long. But I think especially at the start of the match, giving yourself that permission and really being aware and almost being prescriptive with your self-talk during that time, like giving you really trying to script out, all right, how do I want to be talking to myself during those first couple of games to help make that happen? What are some specific things I want to say to myself? Can I actually write that down and maybe put that on a note card and take that with me to the match, coming up with some sort of reminder system for that type of mindset that I want to have? Let's say those first three games that, all right, I know I'm going to play better if I'm hitting through the ball more, if I'm going through my shots. And maybe that does mean I'm missing more those first couple of games. So giving yourself permission, I think, can help with that process. And I think it all starts from the start of the match because it can be easy to sort of, almost fall into a rhythm where maybe you're not hitting through the ball as much or, not going for your shots as much at the start of the match. And then it can be tougher to sort of break that routine as the match goes along. So I think if you can start with it and really come up with a plan to, you know, start off the match by going for your shots more, you set yourself up with a better chance to be successful in that area.
I like the idea, the permission piece, Josh. I might rephrase it into something like a pre-commitment. Let's pre-commit to doing that. Not only give myself permission to miss, but like pre-commit to hitting the shots that I want to hit. Because I think if you look at it from the long-term perspective, is it more important to win today or become a better player over the next several months? Now, ideally, we'd like both. But if you're holding back and you win today, you may not get the improvement that you want than if you had missed a few shots today and then got proficient at those shots that you just missed today. It's hard to grow if you never try to do something. And so I think the other piece, though, is if we're constantly holding back in matches, well, what are you perfecting? You're perfecting holding back in matches. So the more you do it, the more difficult it becomes to break out of that mentality. Just like, you mentioned yourself a counterpuncher. I would consider myself more of a grinder style. I know Steve is kind of the same. I mean, he's got an amazing backhand, makes a ton of balls, and been really successful doing that. But we could all add a little bit more to our game, maybe a little bit more pace, a little heavier. Maybe we could be a little bit, more aggressive in terms of coming to the net a bit, right? So I can see exactly where he's coming from on this. And, so I struggle with this. And so when I play, I'm trying to remind myself of who I'm trying to become. It's not so much about who I am today. And I think, I wrote a blog post some months ago about playing with courage. It's a good time to just go out there, play with courage, pre-commit to being that guy so that you can make some progress on the player that you want to become. Of course, we'd all like to win today, and maybe today's really important and you have to do something, but There will always be another match. There'll always be another tournament. And again, it really depends on why you play. So again, a great question. I think something that many of us experience this sort of fear of making mistakes. So Steve's second question, another good one. Mentally adjusting to a switch of surface that you aren't able to practice on often. So happens a lot, I would say, in adult senior tennis for sure. And actually, I have a player who goes through the reverse of the scenario that Steve has. It says, for example, always on hard court, but needing to adjust to clay. And I have a player who's been spending all summer on clay, and now he's got a big event on hard courts. And so, yeah, it is interesting because if we look at those two surfaces, or even grass, just the tempo of the ball, the height of the ball, is very different, and it can throw off your own personal rhythm and tempo and timing. And so, if you had somebody, Josh, who was, trying to transition but unable to really get any time on that surface, what do you think are some things that could help?
I think starting with talking through, what that change of surface, what you expect from that change of surface. For instance, I used to work at the International Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, Rhode Island, where they're known for their grass courts. And, I think many people who would come play on it, it'd be their first time. And those first however many minutes would be tricky, would be tough. The ball would stay relatively low. They would be try to bounce the ball before a serve, and it wouldn't, leave the ground much. So, I think whenever there's a change of surface, it it is a big adjustment, and that can get in your head a lot. So I think starting with, you know, let's try to really build up an understanding of what do I expect? All right, if I'm moving from hard court to play, for instance, how do I expect that movement piece to be? And how can what can I do in the meantime to best adjust for that? Or if I'm going from clay to hard court, maybe I'm expecting the ball to come at me quicker. And I have to maybe change my take back. Maybe I can't have the big loop on my forehand and backhand, and I have to get my racket back sooner because I'm expecting the ball to come back at me faster, or grass as well, where the ball, where the pace tends to be faster. So I think it all starts with really an understanding of what to expect on that surface, and maybe thinking, what can I do in the meantime, even if maybe I don't have access to practicing on clay right now, or practicing on hard or grass, or whatever the situation is. What can I do in the meantime? And then maybe also similar to that first question, giving yourself permission, maybe those first couple games to ease into it, to find that rhythm. Maybe you have a chance to practice at the facility first. Maybe you don't, but giving yourself that permission to adjust and find that rhythm. And maybe, because it can be very easy to sort of get frustrated right from the start, right? Especially on a new surface, you're not accustomed to it. I actually had this situation recently, where in a higher altitude place, which was a big adjustment. And I don't think we've talked too much about this on the show, but high altitude tennis can be very different in terms of the air is thinner and the ball tends to fly a lot more. It's very easy to hit the ball long. You have to adjust and hit with more spin. So, in that situation, I had to also, think about how I could sort of adjust my own game. And maybe there are adjustments you have to make going from hard to clay or vice versa, in terms of maybe hitting with more or less spin, giving yourself more or less margin, maybe also changing, your movement patterns a little bit, coming to net more or less often. I mean, particularly on grass, coming to net is certainly a very commonly used strategy, and for good reason. The points tend to be a lot shorter. So I think, sort of starting with the expectations of what you're expecting for that surface, thinking about what you can do in the meantime, giving yourself, sort of permission at the start of the match to find your rhythm, to work your way into it. Doesn't have to be pretty. You just have to find a way ultimately. And then, making adjustments if need be.
Yeah, yeah. I think those are some really good things. I think the hitting on the rhythm is important, and I want to talk about maybe a drill that players could do for that. In doing some work with this player who was going the opposite direction, going from clay to hard court, one of the things that was a struggle was the just knowing that you're changing. It wasn't necessarily embracing that. Um, and so the way we saw that come out was a lot of tightness when hitting the ball. And no one plays their best tennis when they're super tight. And so this player's been framing the ball, he's not feeling it pulling up on his shots, etc. And so I want to talk about two specific ways, drills to do with that, but also work on how you feel when you first go out there. Loosen up the body. Try to notice the muscle tension that you have going on so that your body can be a little bit more in flow. So the first drill I would say is one that great coach in Rhode Island talked about at our recent USPTA New England conference. I don't know if you remember this, Josh, but Mario Yano was talking a lot about this rhythm and tempo piece and understanding kind of the ideal cadence that you have for when the ball bounces to when it hits your racket. There's going to be, everybody might have a kind of an ideal, maybe it's 1 second, maybe it's 1.5 seconds, but you want to maybe understand that what that is on your preferred surface. If you're on hard courts, okay, what does that feel like? What's that timing and tempo? And then notice the distance of where the ball is before it gets to your racket. It's going to be different probably on this new surface. So what you want to try to do is understand the distance that you want the ball to bounce in front of you. That gives you that ideal rhythm of, oh, if it's 1.2 seconds, all right, this is what it feels like. Now you start to try to get every ball to bounce that distance away from you so that you can have that perfect, not perfect, but a more comfortable rhythm and tempo with the ball. And so as you begin to develop that flow, your timing should get a little bit better on that surface. If we're going from hard to clay, very often the ball is much slower. We might be waiting on it a little bit too much. It drops a lot, whatever. So if you can think about the distance and the time that you ideally like from the bounce to contact and understand what that is on this new surface, that may help. Something that Angelo Rossetti talked to us about was an awareness drill. He called it a 3-2-1 awareness drill. Very often players are often thinking, that felt bad, and they're making judgments about it. So when you're starting off on this new surface, instead of using terms like good or bad, think of using this 3-2-1 system. So a 3 would be exactly the way you want to hit it. So if you hit the ball exactly the way you want to hit it, just say 3 in your mind. If you hit it just okay, it's 2. If you hit it just as, really wasn't what you wanted, needs work. And so it's a very non-judgmental way to do it. We're going to celebrate the 3s, and we want to try to also lock in the feeling of the 3 so that we can recreate that. The 2s, that's okay. 1 needs work. Something needs work. So maybe it's the distance, maybe it's the timing, maybe I'm a little bit tight. But the whole goal should be by the end of your warm-up or your first practice session that you come off feeling good, so you have a little bit of confidence with respect to the surface, your rhythm, your tempo, and you're a little bit more in control of your physiology out on the court, so that when your match happens, at least you feel like you've built up some experience on the surface, going into that match. I would say the other thing, Josh, I don't know how much this would really help, but you could always do some visualization of past times that you've played on that surface. You probably have played on the surface before. Can you bring forth some more positive memories of playing on that surface? See yourself playing or feel yourself playing there. That may also help with the switch.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think the visualization piece can definitely be useful, right? Especially if you don't have the ability to practice on that surface, going through that visualization process or that mental rehearsal and really sort of seeing yourself and getting the different senses involved in terms of you playing on that surface in the past. And also maybe some specific situations. Maybe you're going from hard court to clay and we're thinking about the movement piece. We're thinking about sliding, right? And maybe, many players, myself included, are not if you don't play on clay all that often, Maybe many players, aren't as comfortable or don't like to try to slide on clay. So thinking about that piece, even visualizing yourself doing the action the way that you intend to or you want to can be very helpful as well.
For sure. Yeah. All right. I think you have another question.
Yeah, I have a few more. Actually, this one just came in recently. It's actually from Racquel Montemayor. She's a coach down in Mexico City.
Oh, cool.
Um, she's a tennis coach at a club here in Mexico City. Also plays a lot of ITF tournaments in her age group. And she had two questions. We can address these one at a time. The first one is how to get back into your playing style when your opponent isn't giving you rhythm. So we can talk about that a little bit because I think that's definitely something that a lot of people probably have dealt with, whether it's, somebody not giving them rhythm because maybe they're a big server and points stay really short, or maybe they're mixing up the pace and the spins and sort of trying to make it tough or almost sabotage their opponents from getting into the rhythm. So how would you start to think about this question, Brian?
Yeah, that's a good one because I think first of all you have to have some awareness of that. Very often players are sucked into somebody else's game and almost don't realize it until it's over. And so I think having a really good sense of what your game is important. Knowing what your weapons are, um, and we've talked about the idea of playing at the highest level of tennis IQ. You have to be very level three in order to understand and make adjustments here and understand that dynamic. I do believe if the player understands her game style very well and realizes that there's something off about it, it's hard to speak to specifics what other players might be doing. Um, but in essence, if you have that good understanding, then it's about um, trying to be very disciplined about how you play your game. And it can be very simple as um, going back to directionals, going back to keeping the ball high and heavy, um, and really creating some discipline around that. It could be also you controlling what you're doing between points a bit more. So that you feel a little bit more in control. Because when we're out of our rhythm, we often are feeling a little out of control. So the best way to begin to assert and practice some control is really begin to manage the pace of the match between the points. So slow it down. Perhaps you have to simplify some of the things that you're doing. Perhaps you have to work on your physiology a bit more breathing, bouncing up and down, loosening things up, so that you can, again, begin to feel a little bit more in control. Because even if you're playing somebody who's a big server and maybe big forehand or something, you still are starting off your service games with your serve, right? So you at least have the opportunity to begin to um, assert some dominance in your service games. So thinking more about your serve plus one plays, being really again disciplined about that. Getting and again, this is all going to be built on your game, your weapons, etc. So without too many specifics, I would often go to making yourself feel better, take more time between points, and then really be disciplined about your game style, understand what maybe is you're being prevented from doing, and just really go back to it and simplify what you're doing and maybe just looking to extend points more. It's hard to get rhythm when there are short points. So that might be at least a way to start.
No, I really like that. I think you definitely um went through that well. I think, there are definitely certain types of players that maybe make it tougher for people to get into a good rhythm, such as the big server, maybe such as, a player that hits more moon balls or slices, or maybe doesn't hit with as much pace. So I think, using that time at the start of the match to, focus on some of the small details, whether it be moving your feet, whether it be creating distance between you and the ball, And also, going back to controlling what you can control in the situation. You can't control what the person on the other side of the net is doing. You can only control how you respond, but also maybe understanding that you won't necessarily need to always be finding your rhythm. I think a lot of people are sort of focused or fixated at times on finding their rhythm. And yes, it's helpful, but I don't think it's always necessary to win a match. Sometimes it's about finding a way and winning ugly and doing what has to be done to get the job done. So I think that's the other piece I would add in there. And then her second part of the question, which I know is something we have talked about a lot on this show, is just in general, some top bits of advice for how to get out of these most frustrating moments. And we see it even at the US Open level, even at the top professional level, players who get very frustrated, players who throw their racket, players that yell at themselves, players that maybe tank. Um, so, what are some of the most common things that you talk to people about, or I guess interventions or strategies that you use with players when it comes to, handling some of these most challenging moments or some of these moments that lead to more frustration?
Yeah. I think that in some ways is a tough one because it's can be different for everybody. So for example, for me, but it looks the same on the outside, right? So we might see the same behavior from somebody, but the actual cause of that might be different. So for me, like, as a younger player, bad temper, probably a perfectionist, didn't like mistakes, and acted out a lot. And but the cure for me was the whole idea of resetting and learning that the most important point of the match was the next one. That really worked for me because I was clearly not valuing that next point as much as I should have. So when I think about interventions, I think more about, first of all, figuring out a little bit more about the person and how they think, but then applying, and this is maybe more of a longer term thing, Josh, but we've often talked about the idea of having a philosophy of performance excellence. And what that is, your own personal philosophy, what that is having or learning better ideas behind how you think. So you have better perspectives on things like competition, challenges, winning and losing, mistakes, how the scoring system in tennis actually works. And I think over the long haul, the more that you get people to understand, the nature of the scoring system and what it is they're trying to win, what we're really trying to achieve in terms of long-term mastery, and then teaching things like how to manage your time between points, how to realize, what's important now, being more present focused. I think that might even, as I'm kind of talking through this, one of the more important things is I think what helps here is like if you can develop a really good personal philosophy on excellence such that you are generating facilitative emotions on the court more. And the more that you can be present moment minded, the more successful you'll be. So, and a scenario would be, let's say you're going through a really tough match and it's now 4-all in the third set. I'm going to favor the player who appears to be embracing being at 4-all and not caring about how we got here. That person is going to be able to take advantage of opportunities that will surely present themselves over the next couple of games. And so if you're able to construct better emotions by having better ways of thinking, and you're really good at always playing in the present, it's always about the next point, and playing one at a time, I think you set yourself up for a lot of success going forward. So like I said, the philosophy piece is a bit of a longer term part, but if everybody put a little emphasis on next point kind of either resetting or letting go of what has already happened and trying to be in that present moment. If it's 5-5 and you blew a 5-2 lead, can you put that aside and say, all right, it's 5-5. Doesn't matter how we got here. It's 5-5. Let's go. And so the more a player can do that, the more successful that player will be, I think.
Yeah, I would also point to that time in between points and really try to both that time in between points and that time in between games and try to think, okay, first of all, let's have a clear idea for what we want to do, how we want to spend that time in between points. And I think, we've talked about this a lot on this show, but the 16-second cure by Dr. Jim Lear is definitely a good place to start. I think can be a good foundation where he breaks it down into the 4 steps. And actually, a way I've described it to some athletes recently, actually a younger athlete in particular, where we were talking about the different steps, but I think, was just having a tougher time was sort of viewing it more as having to memorize it. The way I actually broke it down was past, present, and future. Past sort of being that step 1, that positive response. Like, all right, let's quickly reflect on the past, that past point. And then we're coming into the present. How we're going to use that? We're going to use that with the breath, and then we're going to start thinking about the future. So trying to think whatever that system is, whether it is the 16-second cure, whether you're using that as a foundation, and maybe adding certain things on. Maybe it's playing with the strings. Maybe it's going to the towel. Maybe there's certain self-talk that you're layering onto that as well. Maybe it's something slightly different that you're doing, but having some sort of system in between points so that you can reset, so that you can put that point behind you. So I think that's the first piece. I think the second piece is the perspective piece. And first of all, understanding that you're going to, win and lose somewhere around 50% of points over a period of time, just as the top pros do. We've talked about that, how even the top players only win around 55% of their points. So understanding you're going to win a lot of points, you're going to lose a lot of points. You need to be able to lose points and be able to move on to the next one and not constantly be riding that emotional roller coaster, because that is going to end up costing you. And you're going to end up carrying the emotions from one point to go into the next. So I think when it comes to that perspective piece, part of it is understanding there are going to be a lot of points won and points lost, but also understanding how this particular match fits into the bigger picture. That this one match is one milestone or one test along your journey as a tennis player, as a player who hopefully, has played for a long time, will continue to play for a long time. You'll win a lot of matches and lose a lot of matches. And I think that sort of perspective can take some pressure off, and can make the sort of frustrations of the day-to-day, of let's say that point by point, or even game by game, or you're not winning or not playing your best. It can help to put things in perspective in terms of really the importance in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. Do you have another question, I think?
I don't have any other questions. I have 2 sort of feedback comments that I can share. I guess one that I can definitely start with, and this is actually from one of our most regular listeners, and I know this because he happens to be my father. He always, and I have to give him a shout out here because he listens to every episode. He's listened to every episode we've had, and he always texts me right when they come out and when he listens to them. And
yeah, I think he's the first one to listen to every episode too.
He likely is. He likely is. And maybe there are people in our audience that that can be some competition there, but he's definitely up there. So here is his message. Congrats on your 100th episode. I'm a recreational player and have enjoyed listening and learning from Tennis IQ podcasts. Brian and Josh have useful and practical advice on mental toughness and getting the mental edge during play. Great to also learn from your guests. Some takeaways: breathing patterns, in between point routine, control the controllables. Most important point is the next one. Remember why you're playing. You'll win and lose roughly 50% of the points. Make your opponent as uncomfortable as possible. Keep perspective. It's only one point at a time. Reset, especially when you're behind. And in one sec, he added 2 more things: being intentional and focus on process, not the outcome, which I think honestly is a great summary of a lot of the different themes we've discussed. And then he ended with, "Thanks again. Keep up the good work." So thank you, Dad. Love you. Appreciate the feedback and always listening. And he does also really enjoy the episode. So thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good summary, and hopefully he's applying all of these things to his game, right? Um,
Yep.
I've got a couple comments as well. One of these people, you actually, I think you know both of them. I'll start with Barbara Cilli. So she's the head women's tennis coach at Bryant University. I've had the pleasure and fortune to work with her and her team a lot over the years. And so she wrote, "Wow, 2 years and 100 episodes. That time went by so fast." Well, I just want to thank you and Josh for getting me through COVID. I started listening during the first summer of COVID in 2020. You guys got me through a lot of the downtime. It was Tennis IQ and Sourdough for Beginners that kept me afloat. Thank you both, and congratulations on your 100th episode. Love your podcast. So that was nice. And then a great national senior player who's from Massachusetts, John Wilcox. He's been a friend for a long time. So he wrote, "There's no better way to celebrate episode 100 than to look forward to the next Tennis IQ podcast on my way to an event or competition to help me to mentally prepare to bring a great effort on the court. The reminders have helped me often overcome obstacles, and the accountability is outstanding. They are entertaining and have great stories and guests often. Here's to the next 100. I believe my tennis IQ has improved as a result. Onward." So, great words from both John and Barbara, and I know you know Barbara certainly, and you've met I think John a few times. So, really appreciate those guys weighing in on our 100th episode.
Yeah, yeah, I have definitely met and interacted with both of them and really do appreciate the kind words and happy that, that especially during COVID and especially maybe during, times where people weren't leaving the house as often, and even now that, people certainly are, glad that this podcast provided value and hope that it continues to. And I have one more comment, which is from Ian Richmond. Ian is in the LA area. So here's what he said. "Oh, wow. Congrats. That is such an awesome milestone to hit. Well done. And no critiques from me. It's all such high quality content. I really love how Josh and Brian always cite sources, whether it's a book, class, philosopher, or professional individual. It really gives the podcast a strong academic experience." And then he added on, "I think it would be cool if you guys had a few episodes where you did a case study on some of the pivotal mental health milestones in the game, similar to the Marty Fish documentary you did an episode on. Another example is the Borg versus McEnroe contrast. There was a documentary on HBO that talked about this pretty well as well." So thank you for that, Ian, and definitely appreciate the kind words. We definitely try to include, many different sorts of sources, whether they be straight from the source, whether, when we've had um, academics on, including our most recent episode, um, episode 99, or when we talk about, more of the philosophical piece. I know we've talked about Stoic philosophy and other sorts of philosophy, or talked about different, I remember we had an episode on different books, some of our favorite books that we recommend, or different, we try to pull, we try to draw from different sorts of resources. So I appreciate that. And also, with your suggestion, I think that's definitely something, we can talk more about in terms of, mental health milestones and also maybe mental performance milestones as well over the years. The Marty Fish documentary, and again, we did an episode on this, was interesting because it really shown the light on how mental health can have an impact on performance on the court, and how, top player's career. I mean, Marty Fish reached top 10 in the world, how his career was really sidelined because of his mental health issues. And I think that documentary really did a good job on that. And yeah, I mean, the Borg McEnroe movie also does a good job sort of showing the differences in their personalities, but also maybe some of the things that each of them were going through. I mean, and I think McEnroe's behaviors on the court sometimes came out, you know, more, where obviously he's known for his last name is almost synonymous with, anger and outbursts. And I think that came out more. In Borg would always, obviously this is before my time, being born in 1993, but Borg was always known for being rather stoic, rather even keel, but also had a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of mental health challenges. I know, and had retired quite early from the sport at a young age. And I'm sure, Brian, you can expand on this more than me. But no, I love that idea, and I think what we try to do is try to provide episodes on different types of topics. Some are more ideas and concepts. Some are more based on maybe things that we see, whether it's a quote, whether it's a documentary, whether it's a match or a tournament, like our Grand Slam recaps. And we have, again, one coming up from the US Open. So I appreciate that Ian likes our different types of episodes and different types of things that we cite. And yeah, we definitely will have more things related to that, and maybe the link between mental health and mental performance at some other points going forward.
Yeah, I think the case study idea is a good one that we can explore. That would obviously take a little bit more work and research, um, but it's certainly an interesting one to think about. So yeah, I think with respect to like Borg and McEnroe and those sorts of things, again, we could look at that and dive deeper into those players. I think there's also maybe it's just beginning to stream a documentary about McEnroe on Showtime. That is supposed to be quite good. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure a lot of fans will wanna check that out. So, Josh, what do you think is on the docket for the next 100? What are some things that I know we had an announcement that we wanted to throw out there today.
Yeah, I think one announcement we did want to make is we want to open up the opportunity for fans and listeners to find a way to support the podcast, and we're creating a Patreon, and we'll link to this in the show notes, so that will be there in the show notes, so people can have a couple different options for their support, $3 per month or $7 per month, in terms of finding a way to support the podcast and the efforts and the time that goes into it. So any sort of support we certainly appreciate. So we'll include that in the show notes, and probably we'll have more to say on that going forward. But in terms of these next 100 episodes, I think based on honestly some of this feedback we've received, we have some new directions to go in. I know we have, some more guests that we will have on over these next 100 episodes, maybe some different types of people, but certainly some interesting perspectives, and probably a whole host of different topics that we'll dive into. And yeah, really excited to see where this continues to head.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. And with respect to the Patreon account, that's not something that people have to do. We're still going to be putting out all the episodes as we normally do. It's more of a, if you'd like to do that, that'd be great. I think the more that we get, the more services we can actually provide, and maybe there will be some bonuses in the future. That's something we're thinking about. But we also, given that it's just the two of us, we don't actually have any production staff. I'm not sure if that's true of other podcasts, but it's just the two of us, and we do this all by ourselves. There might be, we don't want to overcommit either to providing all these bonuses, but with the more support, we'll be able to do some of that, I think. And I'm looking forward to more guests. Yeah, more variety of guests. Maybe some guests even at the higher levels of the game as well, or great coaches. So I'm really looking forward to the next 100.
Absolutely. Likewise. And if people have, ideas for guests, for future episodes, you can always, reach out to us. We have our email, tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. And we, yes, we've had people that have reached out just over these past few days, and in terms of asking questions, in terms of comments, but also over these past, 2+ years, we've had a number of, listeners who have reached out both with just general feedback that they enjoyed the podcast, but also questions. And, we've interacted with many of you in that way. So, I would definitely encourage people to continue to do that because, we definitely love to hear the feedback, to hear the questions. And it's always good to feel like, people are listening. Yes, we can see sort of like the metrics and see how, people are listening to the podcast and the stats and that sort of thing. Both in terms of YouTube, where we do have some people who watch, but also in terms of the different audio platforms like Apple and Spotify and Google, and I know there are some others as well. So we always love to hear from you, and if you guys have ideas, we can always think about how to incorporate them, and yeah, onwards to the next 100.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, thanks everybody for sticking with us the last couple of years and listening to our 100th episode. We'll have more stuff in the show notes. We'll actually put in some notes about where the different questions were answered, and we'll have more info on the Patreon stuff. So, like Josh said, if you have any feedback or questions for us, you can email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check us out on Instagram. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.